Have you ever found yourself in a desert season of life, a place of isolation, scarcity, and uncertainty? Today, we journey back to one of the most remarkable stories in the Bible, a story that unfolds in the harsh wilderness of the ancient Near East. It's the story of Elijah, the prophet of God, and the ravens that sustained him during a time of divine judgment and personal testing. This is not just a tale of survival. It's a profound lesson about God's sovereignty, provision, and the unexpected ways he works in the lives of his servants. To fully appreciate the story of Elijah, we need to step back into the 9th century BCE, during one of the most turbulent periods in Israel's history. This was the time of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, rulers of the northern kingdom of Israel. Under their reign, the nation had turned away from Yahweh, the God of Israel, and embraced the worship of Baal, a Canaanite storm god believed to control rain, fertility, and agriculture. Ahab, influenced by his Phoenician wife Jezebel, not only tolerated Baal worship, but actively promoted it. He built a temple for Baal in Samaria, the capital of Israel, and erected Asherah poles, symbols of the Canaanite goddess Asherah. This was a direct violation of the covenant between Israel and Yahweh, which commanded exclusive worship of the one true God. Into this spiritual darkness steps Elijah, whose name means Yahweh is my God. He is a prophet called to confront the corruption of his time. Elijah's mission is clear: to call the people of Israel back to Yahweh and to demonstrate that he alone is God. But this mission comes at great personal risk. Ahab and Jezebel are not just indifferent to Yahweh, they are hostile to his prophets. In fact, Jezebel had already begun killing the prophets of Yahweh, forcing many into hiding. Elijah's first act as a prophet is to deliver a bold message to Ahab. As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. 1 Kings 17:1. This prophecy is not just a prediction of drought, it is a direct challenge to Baal, the so-called storm god. By withholding rain, Yahweh demonstrates his supremacy over creation and exposes the powerlessness of Baal. Elijah's message sets the stage for a dramatic showdown between Yahweh and Baal, a showdown that will unfold in the chapters to come. But for now, Elijah must flee. His life is in danger, and he is about to enter a season of isolation and dependence on God's provision. This is where our story begins, in the wilderness, where God will sustain his servant in the most unexpected ways. Elijah's prophecy of drought. Elijah's first act as a prophet is nothing short of extraordinary. He strides into the court of King Ahab, the most powerful man in Israel, and delivers a message that will change the course of the nation's history. With unwavering confidence, Elijah declares, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." 1 Kings 17:1. Imagine the scene. Ahab, seated in his palace, surrounded by the trappings of power and wealth, is confronted by this lone prophet. Elijah's words are not just a prediction, they are a direct challenge to the king, to Baal, and to the entire system of idolatry that Ahab and Jezebel have established. By invoking the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel, Elijah makes it clear that this drought is not a natural disaster. It is an act of divine judgment. This prophecy strikes at the heart of Baal worship. Baal was believed to be the god of storms, rain, and fertility. The people of Israel had turned to him in hopes of securing abundant harvests and prosperity. But Elijah's message exposes the futility of their idolatry. By withholding rain, Yahweh demonstrates that he alone controls the heavens and the earth. Baal is powerless to stop it. The impact of this drought would be devastating. In an agricultural society like ancient Israel, rain was essential for survival. No rain meant no crops, no food, and ultimately, no life. Elijah's prophecy was a call to repentance, a dramatic reminder that Israel's prosperity depended not on Baal, but on their faithfulness to Yahweh. Elijah's boldness in delivering this message cannot be overstated. He was not just risking his reputation, he was risking his life. Ahab and Jezebel were not known for their tolerance of dissent, especially when it came to their religious policies. Yet, Elijah stands firm, trusting in the God who sent him. His faith and courage set the stage for the miracles that will follow, miracles that will reveal Yahweh's power and provision in the most unexpected ways. Elijah's retreat to the Kerith ravine, 1 Kings 17:2-6. After delivering his bold prophecy to King Ahab, Elijah is instructed by God to flee to a place of solitude and safety. The Lord tells him, "Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan." 1 Kings 17:3. This ravine, a remote and desolate place, would become Elijah's refuge during the early days of the drought. At first glance, the Kerith ravine seems like an unlikely place for survival. It's isolated, rugged, and far from any source of human help. Yet, God promises to provide for Elijah there in a miraculous way. He says, "You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there." 1 Kings 17:4. Now let's pause for a moment to consider the significance of this provision. Ravens, by nature, are scavengers. They are not known for their generosity or their willingness to share food. In fact, under the Mosaic law, ravens were considered unclean birds, Leviticus 11:15. Yet here they are, acting as God's messengers, bringing bread and meat to Elijah, not just once, but twice a day, every day. This is a powerful reminder that God's ways are not our ways. He can use the most unlikely means to accomplish his purposes. The ravens, often associated with death and desolation, become instruments of life and sustenance. The brook, a small and seemingly insignificant stream, becomes a source of life-giving water. In the wilderness, Elijah learns to depend entirely on God's provision. Yet even in this place of provision, there is a test of faith. As the drought continues, the brook begins to dry up. The very source of Elijah's sustenance is threatened. But this is not a failure of God's promise. It is a preparation for the next chapter of Elijah's journey. God is teaching Elijah to trust him not just in times of abundance, but also in times of scarcity. The widow of Zarephath, 1 Kings 17:7-16. As the drought intensifies, the brook at Kerith ravine, once a source of life-giving water, begins to dry up. Elijah, who had depended on this brook and the ravens for his survival, now faces a new challenge. But God is not done providing for his servant. In 1 Kings 17:8-9, the Lord tells Elijah, "Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." Zarephath is not just any town. It's located in Sidon, the heartland of Queen Jezebel's homeland. This is a bold move. Elijah, a prophet of Yahweh, is being sent into enemy territory. But God's plans often take us to unexpected places, and his provision often comes through unexpected people. When Elijah arrives at Zarephath, he finds a widow gathering sticks. He calls out to her and asks for a drink of water. As she goes to fetch it, he adds, "And please bring me a piece of bread." 1 Kings 17:11. The widow's response is heartbreaking. "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replies, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." 1 Kings 17:12. This widow is at the end of her rope. She has nothing left but a handful of flour and a few drops of oil, just enough for one last meal. Yet Elijah asks her to trust him, and more importantly, to trust God. He tells her, Don't be afraid, go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. 1 Kings 17:13-14. Imagine the faith it took for this widow to obey. She was preparing to eat her last meal, yet Elijah asked her to give it away. But she does as he says, and the miracle unfolds. Just as Elijah promised, the jar of flour and the jug of oil never run out. Day after day, there is enough to feed Elijah, the widow, and her son. The resurrection of the widow's son, 1 Kings 17:17-24. Just when it seems that the widow of Zarephath and her household have found stability through God's miraculous provision, tragedy strikes. The widow's son becomes gravely ill. His condition worsens until finally he stops breathing. The text tells us he died. 1 Kings 17:17. The widow's grief is overwhelming. In her anguish, she turns to Elijah and cries out, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" 1 Kings 17:18. Her words are raw and filled with pain. She feels abandoned, as if God has turned against her. Elijah doesn't offer empty words of comfort. Instead, he takes action. He takes the boy from his mother's arms, carries him to the upper room where he has been staying, and lays him on the bed. Then Elijah does something extraordinary. He cries out to God in prayer. Elijah's prayer is passionate and heartfelt. He pleads with God, saying, "Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?" 1 Kings 17:20. Then he stretches himself over the boy 3 times and cries out, "Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." 1 Kings 17:21. God hears Elijah's prayer. In a moment that defies all natural laws, the boy's life returns to him. He breathes again. His heart beats again. The widow's son is alive. This is no mere recovery from illness. This is a resurrection, the first recorded in the Bible. Elijah brings the boy back to his mother and says, "Look, your son is alive." 1 Kings 17:23. The widow's response is profound. She says to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." 1 Kings 17:24. First and foremost, this story reminds us of God's sovereignty and his ability to provide in ways that defy human logic. Whether it's through ravens, a brook, or a widow's last handful of flour, God's provision is always sufficient. He is not limited by our circumstances or resources. As the psalmist writes, "The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food at the proper time." Psalm 145:15. Another key theme is God's care for the marginalized. The widow of Zarephath was a Gentile, a foreigner, and a woman, 3 characteristics that would have made her socially and spiritually marginalized in that culture. Yet God chose her to be a vessel of his provision and a recipient of his miraculous power. This foreshadows the inclusivity of God's kingdom, where there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Galatians 3:28. Finally, the resurrection of the widow's son reveals God's ultimate power over life and death. This miracle points forward to the resurrection power of Jesus Christ, who conquered death once and for all. It reminds us that no situation is beyond God's reach. He can bring life to the dead, hope to the hopeless, and restoration to the broken.